The warning bells screamed through the massive crystal halls of Zephyr Prime as Ambassador Kex Thul rushed toward the emergency council session. His 6 legs moved faster than dignity allowed, but fear drove him forward. The holographic displays along the corridors showed the same terrible news over and over again. 17 star systems had vanished in just 3 months, not conquered or destroyed in the usual sense, but completely consumed as if they had never existed at all. The council. Chamber doors slid open with a soft hiss, and Kexthul entered to find chaos. Representatives from dozens of species filled their floating platforms, while emergency lights cast eerie shadows across the vast dome. High Counselor Vexara stood at the center podium, her crystalline form pulsing with distress signals that made the translator units crackle with static. "The situation has moved beyond critical," Vexara announced, and her voice carried the weight of civilizations. "The Void Swarm has consumed the Kepler systems completely. Our best estimates suggest they have converted the raw matter from those worlds into approximately 40,000 new ships." A wave of terrified chirps, clicks, and harmonic frequencies swept through the chamber. Kexthul felt his own breathing apparatus tighten as the implications hit him. The swarm did not just destroy worlds. They ate them and turned the atoms into more of themselves. It was the perfect predator, and it was heading toward the core systems. "What of our combined fleets?" asked Ambassador Theknor from the Rigel. "Consortium." Her tentacles writhed with barely controlled panic. "Gone," Vexara replied simply. "Admiral Zexkol launched the Grand Alliance fleet 6 days ago. 12 species contributed their best ships and crews. Over 2 million souls fought bravely." She paused, and her light dimmed. "We received one final transmission before the quantum foam disrupted all communications. The battle lasted 37 minutes. The chamber fell silent except for the soft humming of life support systems. 37 minutes to destroy the greatest military force the galaxy had ever assembled. Kexthul tried to process the numbers, but his mind refused to accept them. "There is one option remaining," Vexara continued, and her tone carried a weight that made several representatives recoil. "The Deathworlder protocols." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Half the chamber erupted in protests, while the other half fell into stunned silence. Kexthul had heard whispers of the protocols, but never imagined they would actually be invoked. The very concept went against everything civilized species believed about warfare and diplomacy. "The humans," whispered Ambassador Felnix from the Tau Ceti Union. "You want to call the humans." "Not want," Vexara corrected. "Need. The mathematics are clear. Conventional warfare cannot stop the swarm. We need something that thinks differently, something that evolved under conditions we would consider impossible." Kexthul remembered his first encounter with a human delegation 20 years ago. They had seemed so primitive with their single-star technology and crude faster-than-light drives. Their ambassador had been a female named Carter, who smiled too much and asked uncomfortable questions about galactic military doctrine. The Council had welcomed them politely, and then carefully managed their expansion to ensure they remained in the outer rim systems where they could not cause trouble. "Earth is 3 times standard gravity," continued Vexara, as if reading his thoughts. "Their atmosphere contains oxygen at concentrations that would ignite in most ships. Their weather patterns include storms that generate electrical discharges measuring in the millions of volts. Their planet has survived multiple extinction events, including asteroid impacts and supervolcanic eruptions that would sterilize most worlds." She paused to let this information settle. "And through all of this, humans not only survived, but developed into a spacefaring species." "They are barbarians," protested Counselor Hexmoth from the Centauri Collective. "Their military doctrine emphasizes individual aggression over collective harmony. They solve problems through violence rather than negotiation." "Yes," agreed Vexara, and her tone made it clear this was not a criticism. "That is exactly why we need them." Meanwhile, in a completely different part of the galaxy, Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the exploration vessel USS Endeavour watching a routine star mapping operation. The ship hummed quietly through space near the galactic rim where few civilized species bothered to travel. Morrison preferred it out here away from the political complexities of the inner systems, where every decision had to be approved by committees and subcommittees. Lieutenant Sam Brooks looked up from his tactical station with a puzzled expression. "Captain, we are receiving a transmission on the old diplomatic frequency, the one that has been dark since first contact." Morrison felt a chill run down his spine. That frequency was reserved for absolute emergencies. "Put it through." The main screen flickered and the familiar face of Dr. Helen Carter appeared. She looked older than Morrison remembered, and there were stress lines around her eyes that had not been there during their last meeting. Her usually perfect diplomatic composure was cracked, and something very close to panic showed through. "Jake, if you are receiving this, then Earth needs to know immediately. The Galactic Council is invoking the Deathworlder protocols. I repeat, they are calling for humanity under the emergency provisions of the First Contact Treaty." Chief Engineer Lisa Park moved closer to the screen. "Helen, what is happening out there?" Carter took a deep breath, and Morrison could see her hands shaking slightly. "Something called the Void Swarm has been consuming entire star systems. The combined fleets of 12 species were destroyed in less than an hour. The Council is desperate enough to ask for help from what they call Category 5 Deathworlders." Category 5. "What?" asked Brooks. "Deathworlders," Carter repeated. "Jake, they have been classifying species based on their homeworld conditions since first contact. Most civilized races evolved on stable planets with mild weather and predictable environments. They consider Earth to be one of the most hostile environments capable of supporting intelligent life." Morrison stared at the screen as the implications began to sink in. "They think we are dangerous because we come from a dangerous world." "Not. Think, Jake. No. I have been reading the classified files since the emergency began. Do you know what they call our home system in their official records? Sol Hazard Zone. They have been limiting our expansion and managing our integration because they were afraid of what we might become if we understood our true nature." Lisa Park laughed, but there was no humor in it. "So, let me get this straight. For 50 years they have been treating us like children who might hurt themselves with sharp objects. And now they want us to save them," Morrison finished. Carter nodded grimly. "The council chambers are in chaos. Half of them want to evacuate the core systems and retreat to the galactic edge. The other half are arguing that calling in Deathworlders will be worse than the swarm itself." "What do you need from us?" Morrison asked. "Get this information to Earth immediately. Admiral Hayes and Fleet Command need to understand what they are really asking for. If we do this, there is no going back. The galaxy will never see humanity the same way again." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge of the Endeavour in stunned silence. Morrison looked at his crew and saw his own thoughts reflected in their faces. Everything they thought they knew about humanity's place in the galaxy had just been turned upside down. "Sam, plot a course for Earth maximum speed," Morrison ordered. "Lisa, I want every bit of power you can give me. We need to get home fast." "Already." "On it, Captain," both officers replied simultaneously. As the Endeavour turned toward Sol System, Morrison stared out at the stars and wondered what humanity was about to unleash on the galaxy. Admiral Patricia Hayes stood before the massive holographic display in Fleet Command headquarters, buried deep beneath the Colorado mountains. The data streaming from Captain Morrison's urgent transmission painted a picture that challenged everything. She thought she knew about humanity's role in galactic civilization. Around the circular chamber, her senior staff watched in silence as alien documents filled the screens with classifications and threat assessments that made humans sound like barely contained weapons of mass destruction. General Robert Kane stepped, closer to examine a particularly disturbing section of the files. According to this, the Galactic Council has been monitoring Earth's military development for decades. They have detailed reports on our nuclear weapons, our biological warfare research, and our orbital defense platforms. "Look at this section," said Admiral Nicole Foster, pointing to another display. "They classify our standard gravity as extreme hazard level. Our atmospheric composition is listed as toxic to 87% of known species, and apparently, our weather patterns are considered catastrophic by galactic standards." Dr. Marcus Webb moved between the displays with growing excitement rather than concern. As Earth's leading expert on alien biology, he had always wondered why so few species seemed physically robust compared to humans. Now he was seeing the answer laid out in stark detail. "Patricia, you need to understand what this means," Webb said, turning to face the Admiral. "Every other species in the galaxy evolved on worlds that we would consider paradise planets. Stable temperatures, mild weather, predictable seasonal patterns, and gentle gravity. They developed technology to overcome challenges, while we developed our bodies and minds to survive anything our world could throw at us." President Catherine Lewis entered the briefing room flanked by her security detail, and immediately the atmosphere shifted from academic discussion to urgent military planning. She had been pulled from a state dinner with the European Union delegation and still wore her formal evening dress, but her expression was all business. "Give me the situation in simple terms," she ordered, taking her seat at the head of the conference. Table Admiral Hayes activated the central hologram showing a three-dimensional map of the affected star systems. Red zones indicated areas consumed by the void swarm, while yellow regions marked evacuation zones. The pattern was clear and terrifying. The alien threat was moving in a direct line toward the most populated sectors of the galaxy. "Madam President, an unknown enemy called the Void Swarm has destroyed 17 star systems and consumed the combined military forces of 12 alien species in a single engagement lasting less than 40 minutes, Hayes explained. "The Galactic Council is invoking emergency protocols that officially recognize Earth as a Category 5 Deathworlder civilization and requesting immediate military assistance." "Category 5 Deathworlder," Lewis repeated slowly. "What exactly does that classification mean?" Dr. Webb stepped forward with a data pad full of alien documents. "It means they consider us to be the product of one of the most hostile environments capable of supporting intelligent life. Our planet has subjected us to constant evolutionary pressure through ice ages, asteroid impacts, supervolcanic eruptions, and climate shifts that would extinction-level events on most worlds. And they think this makes us useful soldiers," Lewis said. "Not just useful," corrected General Kane. "According to their military assessments, humans can function in environments that would kill most alien species within minutes. We can survive in toxic atmospheres, extreme temperatures, crushing gravity, and radiation levels that would sterilize their homeworlds." Admiral Foster pulled up another section of the alien files. "There is more, Madam President. They have been deliberately limiting our expansion and technological development because they were afraid of what we might become if we understood our own capabilities." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. For 50 years, Earth had accepted a junior role in galactic politics, assuming that older civilizations knew better. Now it appeared that those same civilizations had been carefully managing humanity out of fear rather than condescension. President Lewis stood and walked to the main display, showing the advancing void swarm. "How long before this threat reaches human space?" "At current rate of expansion, approximately 18 months, Hayes replied. "But that assumes they maintain their current consumption pattern. If they accelerate or change direction, the timeline could be much shorter." "What are our military options?" Lewis asked. Fleet Admiral Tony Rodriguez entered the briefing room carrying a thick folder of preliminary battle plans. "I have been running scenarios since we received Morrison's transmission. The good news is that we can mobilize a significant force quickly, The bad news is that we would be going into combat against an enemy that destroyed the best the galaxy had to offer. Rodriguez moved to the tactical display and began highlighting human fleet positions throughout known space. We have approximately 200 ships of various classes scattered across 30 systems. Most are exploration or research vessels. But we do have significant military assets, including the heavy cruisers Valiant and Independence, plus a dozen destroyers and frigates. How does that compare to what the aliens lost? Kane asked. The combined alien fleet numbered over 3,000, ships with crews totaling more than 2 million individuals. Rodriguez replied grimly. We would be outnumbered 15 to 1 even if we mobilized every human vessel in space. Dr. Webb looked up from his analysis of the alien military reports. Numbers may not be the deciding factor here. According to these documents, the alien species that fought the swarm were operating under tactical doctrines designed for their specific physiologies and environmental tolerances. They retreat from radiation zones that we would consider mildly uncomfortable. They avoid atmospheric combat because their life support systems cannot handle environmental variations. Are you suggesting we fight differently because we come from a harsher world? Lewis asked. I am suggesting we fight in ways they cannot imagine because we survive in conditions they cannot comprehend, Webb replied. Look at this tactical analysis from their last major military engagement before the swarm appeared. When facing environmental hazards, their standard procedure is immediate withdrawal to safe distance, followed by long-range bombardment. They never considered the possibility of using hostile environments as tactical advantages. Admiral Hayes studied the alien battle reports with growing understanding. They fight like species that evolved on safe worlds. Everything is calculated to minimize risk and preserve life at all costs. While we fight like species that learn survival requires taking calculated risks and accepting casualties to achieve victory, Rodriguez added. The question is whether that difference is enough to matter against this swarm. President Lewis returned to her chair and looked around the room at her advisors. I need recommendations. Do we answer their call for help? From a strategic standpoint, we have little choice, Kane said. If the swarm continues its expansion, it will reach human space eventually. Better to fight them now as part of a galactic coalition than face them alone later. From a scientific standpoint, this is an unprecedented opportunity, Webb added. We could learn more about our true capabilities in 6 months than we have discovered in 50 years of careful diplomatic relations. Admiral Hayes nodded slowly. From a military standpoint, this could change everything. If we succeed, we will never again be treated as a junior partner in galactic affairs. If we fail, we will have died fighting for something greater than ourselves. President Lewis stood and moved to the window overlooking the mountain valley below. In the distance, she could see the lights of Colorado Springs, and beyond that, the launch platforms where human ships waited for orders that would carry them to distant stars. Dr. Webb, I want a complete analysis of human physiological advantages based on these alien assessments. Admiral Rodriguez, begin mobilizing our fleet immediately. General Kane, coordinate with our allies and prepare for the possibility that this conflict will reach Earth. She turned back to face her advisors with the expression that had carried her through 2 presidential campaigns and a dozen international crises. Admiral Hayes, contact Captain Morrison and tell him to inform Dr. Carter that Earth accepts the Council's request for assistance. We will show the galaxy exactly what Deathworlders can do. As the meeting broke up and her staff hurried to implement her orders, President Lewis remained at the window staring up at the stars. Somewhere out there, an enemy that had consumed entire civilizations was heading toward everything humanity had built. But for the first time in 50 years, Earth would meet that threat as equals rather than supplicants. The galaxy had asked for monsters to save them from extinction, and humanity was about to show them exactly what kind of monsters a death world could produce. The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Kepler 442 system, and immediately every sensor on every ship screamed warnings that would have sent any other species fleeing back to safe space. Commander Ryan Mitchell stood on the bridge of the assault carrier Freedom, watching displays that showed radiation levels high enough to cook most alien life forms and gravitational anomalies that made normal navigation impossible. "Sir, we are detecting massive debris fields throughout the system," reported Lieutenant Jennifer Adams from her position at the sensor station. "The void swarm appears to be in the process of consuming the fourth planet." Mitchell studied the DATI tactical display showing thousands of biomechanical ships swarming around what had once been a thriving world. The swarm vessels moved in perfect coordination like cells in a massive organism, and their ships seemed to be literally eating the planet's surface and converting the matter into new constructs. "Where are the Galactic Council forces?" asked Commander Elena Vasquez from her ship, the heavy cruiser Valiant. "Retreating to minimum safe distance," replied Captain Chris Taylor from the stealth destroyer Phoenix. "They are maintaining position approximately 10 million kilometers from the primary combat zone." Mitchell opened a communication channel to the alien fleet commander Admiral Kexavol of the Rigel Defense Forces. The alien's image appeared on screen showing obvious signs of stress and exhaustion. Behind him, Mitchell could see crew members frantically working at stations while warning lights flashed throughout their bridge. "Admiral, this is Commander Mitchell of the Terran Defense Force. We are ready to engage the enemy." Kexavol's tentacles writhed in what Mitchell had learned was an expression of extreme agitation. "Commander Mitchell, you cannot approach the combat zone. The radiation levels alone will kill your crew within minutes. The gravitational distortions will tear your ships apart. The swarm is generating environmental conditions that make combat impossible." "Admiral, we appreciate your concern, but human ships are designed to operate in extreme environments," Mitchell replied calmly. "We will be engaging the enemy at close range." "Close range," Kexavol repeated in obvious horror. "Commander, no species can survive close combat with the swarm. They generate toxic atmospheres, superheated plasma fields, and gravitational weapons that exceed all known safety parameters." Mitchell smiled grimly as he watched his tactical display update with targeting solutions that would have been impossible for ships not built to Earth's extreme specifications. "Admiral, with respect, your safety parameters were designed for species that evolved on paradise worlds. We come from a place where superheated plasma fields are called lightning storms." The communication ended, and Mitchell turned to address his crew. Around him, men and women who had grown up breathing Earth's oxygen-rich atmosphere and living under crushing gravity prepared for a battle that every other species considered suicide. These were pilots who had trained in the asteroid belts, around Jupiter, and Marines who practiced boarding operations in the radioactive zones around damaged fusion reactors. "All ships, this is Mitchell," he announced on the fleet-wide channel. "We are going in fast and hard. Use the radiation zones as cover, and remember that everything that makes this environment lethal to them makes it just another day at the office for us." Lieutenant Colonel Paul Smith listened from the Marine Assault Bay of the Freedom as his troops made final preparations for boarding operations. Around him, Marines sealed environmental suits that were designed for Earth's toxic atmosphere and carried weapons that could function in vacuum radiation and extreme temperatures. These were soldiers who had trained in the lava tubes of Iceland and the pressure chambers beneath Earth's oceans. "Listen up, people," Smith announced to his Marines. "The enemy is expecting us to fight like every other species in the galaxy. They expect us to retreat from hostile environments and avoid close combat in dangerous conditions. They have never faced an enemy that considers a Category 5 death world to be home." The human fleet accelerated toward the swarm formation at speeds that would have been impossible for ships not built with Earth's extreme engineering standards. The Freedom led the charge, followed by the Valiant and Phoenix, plus a dozen smaller vessels carrying crews who had grown up in Earth's unforgiving environment. Squadron leader Jennifer Adams launched her fighter wing directly into a radiation storm that was tearing apart abandoned alien vessels. Her pilots flew through electromagnetic fields that would have fried the navigation systems of any ship not designed for Earth's violent weather patterns. They used solar flares as cover and asteroid impacts as tactical advantages. "Phoenix Leader, this is Eagle Squadron," Adams reported over the communication channel. "We are engaging swarm fighters in the debris field around the fourth planet. Their ships are having difficulty maintaining formation in the gravitational anomalies." Commander Taylor watched from the Phoenix as human fighters dove through spaces that alien pilots would never dare to enter. The enemy ships were fast and deadly, but they were designed for the stable, predictable conditions that most species considered normal combat environments. When faced with the chaos that humans called Tuesday, they began to lose coordination. Captain Morrison had arrived with a task force of converted exploration vessels that were now serving as makeshift weapons platforms. His tactical officer, Sam Brooks, targeted swarm ships that were trying to retreat from the environmental hazards that human vessels used as highways. "Captain, we are detecting massive quantum distortions emanating from the primary swarm construct," reported Chief Engineer Lisa Park. "It appears to be some kind of command vessel coordinating the entire fleet through subspace communications." Morrison studied the readings and realized they had found the key to the enemy's perfect coordination. The swarm operated as a hive mind, with all tactical decisions flowing through quantum entanglement networks that required stable environmental conditions to function properly. "Lisa, I want you to overload our main reactor," Morrison ordered. "Create the biggest space-time distortion you can manage." Park stared at him in shock. "Captain, that will destroy the ship and probably kill everyone aboard. It will also disrupt their quantum communications and break their coordination," Morrison replied. "Sometimes the only way to win is to be willing to lose everything." The human assault reached the swarm mothership as Morrison's ship began its suicidal run toward the quantum communication array. Smith's Marines launched their boarding pods directly into the enemy vessel's docking bays, while human fighters provided cover by flying through defensive fire that would have been impossible for any other species to navigate. Inside the swarm mothership, Smith found himself fighting in corridors filled with toxic atmosphere and crushing gravity that would have killed alien soldiers instantly. His Marines advanced through environmental conditions that made Earth's most hostile regions look comfortable, while the enemy struggled to adapt to the changing battlefield conditions. Dr. Sarah Kim monitored the battle from her research station on Mars and watched as her theoretical predictions proved correct. The Void Swarm's hive mind communication system was designed for the stable, predictable environments that most species considered normal. When human ships began using their own damaged reactors as weapons, the resulting space-time distortions severed the quantum entanglement networks that held the enemy fleet together. The turning point came when Morrison's ship detonated its reactor core in the heart of the swarm formation. The resulting quantum cascade effect rippled through subspace, and suddenly thousands of perfectly coordinated enemy vessels found themselves operating as individual units without central command. Human forces pressed their advantage using tactics that would have been impossible for species not adapted to constant environmental chaos. They fought through radiation storms, used gravitational anomalies as weapons, and turned every hostile condition into a tactical advantage. Commander Mitchell watched as the swarm formation began to collapse without their hive mind coordination. Individual enemy ships tried to retreat, but found themselves trapped in the same environmental hazards that human forces used as cover. One by one, the biomechanical vessels were destroyed by an enemy that refused to fight according to the established rules of galactic warfare. When the battle finally ended, 14 hours after it began, the Kepler 442 system was littered with the wreckage of both fleets. The Void Swarm had been stopped, but the cost had been terrible. 2/3 of the human fleet was gone, including Morrison's ship and hundreds of crew members who would never see Earth again. But they had done something that every military analyst in the galaxy had declared impossible. They had faced the unstoppable Void Swarm in direct combat and emerged victorious. The Deathworlders had proven that sometimes the most dangerous enemy was not the one with the best technology or the largest fleet, but the one willing to fight in conditions that would kill anyone else. Admiral Patricia Hayes stood in the war room at Fleet Command, reading casualty reports that painted the victory at Kepler 442 in stark numbers. 237 human ships had entered the battle, and only 81 had returned to friendly space. Over 15,000 crew members would never see Earth again, but their sacrifice had broken the back of an enemy that had consumed 17 star systems without losing a single vessel. The holographic displays around the room showed the aftermath, spreading across the galaxy as human tactical doctrines began to reshape how civilized species thought about warfare. Captain Steve Johnson's converted mining ships were carving through swarm formations in the Vega sector, using industrial equipment as weapons. Colonel Amy Foster's ground forces had established beachheads on 3 worlds that the Galactic Council had written off as completely lost. General Robert Kane entered the briefing room carrying intercepted alien communications that revealed just how much the galaxy's perspective had changed in the weeks since humans entered the conflict. Patricia, you need to see these reports from the front lines. Our allies are starting to call our tactics impossible. Hayes activated the main display showing a compilation of alien military assessments translated into basic English. The reports described human forces engaging in combat maneuvers that violated every established principle of galactic warfare. Humans were fighting in radiation zones that would sterilize most planets. They were using gravity wells as tactical advantages and treating toxic atmospheres like minor inconveniences. Look at this section from the Rigel Defense Forces, Kane continued, pointing to a particular report. They describe watching human Marines board enemy vessels using nothing but standard environmental suits in conditions that would require their heaviest hazmat equipment. The alien commander actually used the word supernatural to describe our combat capabilities. Dr. Marcus Webb joined the briefing carrying his own analysis of the biological differences that were becoming apparent as the war continued. The medical reports from our field hospitals are fascinating. Human casualties are recovering from injuries that would be permanently disabling for most alien species. Our bone density, muscle mass, and cardiovascular systems are so far beyond galactic norms that their medical textbooks are being rewritten. Hayes studied a tactical report from Commander Elena Vasquez, whose heavy cruiser Valiant had become the flagship for a mixed human-alien task force operating in the contested Proxima region. The report detailed a battle where human ships had deliberately flown through the corona of a red giant star to attack swarm vessels that had taken shelter in what they thought was an impregnable position. Elena writes that her alien crew members required full radiation protection and heavy sedation just to survive the approach, Hayes noted. Her human crew treated it as a routine navigation hazard. The door opened, and President Catherine Lewis entered, accompanied by Dr. Helen Carter, who had returned from Zephyr Prime with first-hand accounts of how the Galactic Council was reacting to humanity's military performance. Carter looked exhausted, but her expression carried a mixture of pride and concern that immediately caught Hayes's attention. "Madam President, the situation at the Galactic Capital is complex," Carter began, taking her seat at the conference table. "The council members are grateful for our intervention, but they are also terrified of what we represent. Some are calling for immediate restrictions on human military expansion once the crisis ends." Lewis activated her personal datapad showing classified intelligence reports from human agents embedded throughout galactic civilization. I have been reading similar assessments from our diplomatic corps. It seems that saving the galaxy comes with its own set of political complications. Kane pulled up a series of intercepts from alien military communications that painted an increasingly complex picture. Several council species have quietly begun upgrading their own defensive systems with specific emphasis on protecting against human-style tactics. They are calling it defensive preparation, but the targeting profiles suggest they consider us a potential threat. "Can you blame them?" asked Webb with a wry smile. From their perspective, we just demonstrated that everything they thought they knew about military science was wrong. A species they had been carefully managing as junior partners just proved capable of victories they considered impossible. Hayes moved to the strategic display showing human forces scattered across dozens of star systems as the war against the Void Swarm continued. Each engagement had followed the same pattern. Human forces would attack through environmental conditions that alien allies considered suicidal and emerge victorious against odds that should have guaranteed defeat. The problem is that our success is changing the fundamental balance of galactic politics, Carter explained. For centuries, the Council has maintained peace through a careful system of technological and military parity. No single species was powerful enough to dominate the others. Our intervention has upset that balance. Fleet Admiral Tony Rodriguez appeared on the main screen via secure communication from his flagship in the Centauri sector, where human forces were conducting joint operations with alien allies. Behind him, the bridge crew worked at stations that would have been impossible for most species to operate under combat conditions. Admiral Hayes, we are receiving formal requests from 17 different species asking for human military advisors, Rodriguez reported. They want to learn our tactics and adapt their own forces accordingly. And the Council's response? Lewis asked. Mixed, Rodriguez replied. Half of them want to study our methods and incorporate them into galactic military doctrine. The other half want to ensure that such methods are never used again. Carter leaned forward with an expression of deep concern. There is something else you need to know. Ambassador Kex Thule has been circulating a proposal for what he calls containment protocols. The idea is to limit human expansion and military development once the swarm threat is eliminated. The room fell silent as the implications became clear. The same species that had begged for human assistance were already planning to control that assistance once it was no longer desperately needed. What kind of limitations are they proposing? Kane asked. Restrictions on human ship construction, limits on the number of systems we can occupy, and mandatory council oversight of any military operations involving human forces, Carter replied. They are essentially proposing to return us to our previous status as a managed species. Hayes felt a cold anger building in her chest as she realized the true nature of their situation. Humanity had sacrificed thousands of lives to save civilizations that now wanted to chain them to prevent future threats to their own dominance. They asked us to be monsters to save them, she said quietly. Now they want to put the monsters back in their cage. President Lewis stood and moved to the window overlooking the Colorado Mountains, where human engineers were working around the clock to build new ships for the continuing war. The question is whether we allow ourselves to be caged again. The war is not over yet, Rodriguez pointed out from his remote location. The swarm still controls large sections of the galactic rim, and they are adapting to our tactics. We are seeing new ship designs that appear specifically engineered to counter human advantages. Webb pulled up his latest analysis of captured swarm technology showing biomechanical adaptations that suggested an enemy capable of rapid evolution. The creatures are learning from each engagement. They are developing resistance to the environmental conditions we have been using as weapons. Then we need to keep adapting faster than they can, Hayes decided. Admiral Rodriguez coordinates with our research divisions to develop new tactical approaches. Dr. Webb, I want a complete analysis of swarm evolutionary capabilities. She turned to face President Lewis with the expression of a career military officer who had seen too many wars to have any illusions about politics or gratitude. Madam President, we need to have a serious discussion about humanity's future in galactic civilization. Lewis nodded slowly as she watched construction crews preparing the next wave of ships that would carry human forces to battles across the galaxy. The Council called for Deathworlders to save them from extinction. I think it is time they learned exactly what that means for the balance of power they have worked so hard to maintain. Outside the mountain facility, Human ships lifted off into the star-filled sky, carrying crews who had grown up on a world that would kill most alien species within hours. They were heading toward battles that other civilizations considered impossible, flying through conditions that would be classified as natural disasters on any other world. The galaxy had asked for monsters, and humanity had delivered. Now everyone would have to live with the consequences of that decision, including the monsters themselves. 6 months after the first human ships had answered the galaxy's desperate call for help, Admiral Tony Rodriguez stood in the redesigned council chambers on Zephyr Prime, watching species that had once patronized humanity now compete for their attention and protection. The massive crystalline dome had been modified with environmental controls capable of supporting Deathworlder physiology, and the floating platforms now included sections designed for beings who had evolved under crushing gravity and toxic atmospheres. The transformation was complete and irreversible. Human officers served alongside alien counterparts in integrated fleets that patrolled sectors once considered lost to the Void Swarm. The biomechanical plague that had consumed 17 star systems in 3 months had been eliminated entirely, but the cost of that victory had reshaped galactic civilization in ways that no one had anticipated. Dr. Helen Carter watched from her position as Earth's primary ambassador as President Catherine Lewis addressed the assembled representatives via holographic link from the United Nations headquarters in New York. Behind Lewis, the flags of Earth's nations provided a backdrop that reminded everyone present that humanity was not just another single-world species, but a collection of cultures that had learned cooperation through centuries of conflict. On their Deathworld home, members of the Galactic Council 6 months ago, you invoked emergency protocols that recognized Earth as a Category 5 Deathworlder civilization and requested immediate military assistance against an enemy that threatened all sentient life. Lewis began with the calm authority that had carried her through 2 presidential campaigns and a war that redefined galactic politics. Today, we gathered to discuss the future of the civilization we fought together to preserve. Ambassador Kex Thule of the Valen Federation shifted uncomfortably on his floating platform as he prepared to address the elephant in the room that no one wanted to discuss directly. The containment protocols he had proposed months earlier had been quietly abandoned when it became clear that human forces were not only still needed, but had become essential to maintaining galactic security. President Lewis, we are grateful for humanity's sacrifice and service during the crisis, Kex Thule began carefully. However, the Council must address concerns about the long-term implications of integrating Deathworlder capabilities into our existing security framework. The response came not from Lewis but from Fleet Admiral Rodriguez, who stepped forward with the confidence of an officer whose forces had proven themselves in battles that other species still considered impossible. Ambassador, with respect, those concerns should have been considered before you asked us to save your civilizations. You cannot invoke emergency protocols when you need us and return to containment policies when you feel safe. High Counselor Vexara activated the central holographic display showing current military deployments across the galaxy. Human-led task forces were stationed in 17 different sectors, providing security for worlds that had been evacuated during the swarm crisis. Mixed crews of humans and aliens operated under tactical doctrines that had been developed during the war and proven effective against threats that conventional forces could not handle. The reality is that galactic security now depends on capabilities that only Deathworlder species possess, Vexara admitted with obvious reluctance. Our own military forces remain incapable of operating in the extreme environments where future threats are most likely to emerge. Carter accessed her personal datapad and pulled up reports from human exploratory missions that had been investigating the origin of the Void Swarm. The findings were both fascinating and deeply concerning. The biomechanical plague had not been a natural phenomenon, but rather an escaped weapon created by an ancient civilization that had destroyed itself in a war fought under conditions that would have been impossible for current galactic species to survive. The swarm was not unique. Carter announced to the assembled council. Our archaeological teams have discovered evidence of at least 3 similar weapon systems in the galactic dark zones. Each was created by civilizations that developed under extreme environmental conditions similar to Earth. The revelation sent ripples of concern through the council chambers, as representatives realized that the crisis they had just survived might be only the first of many. The galaxy contained ancient threats that could only be countered by species capable of fighting in conditions that civilized worlds would consider apocalyptic. Captain Chris Taylor appeared on the main screen from his position aboard the stealth destroyer Phoenix, which was conducting long-range reconnaissance in the galactic rim territories. Behind him, his bridge crew worked at stations that would have been lethal for most alien species, but provided human operators with tactical advantages that had proven decisive in dozens of engagements. Council members, we are detecting anomalous energy signatures in the void regions beyond charted space, Taylor reported. The patterns are similar to what we observed before the swarm emerged, but on a much larger scale. The implication was clear and terrifying. Something else was stirring in the dark spaces between the stars, and conventional galactic forces would be no more capable of stopping it than they had been against the original threat. Admiral Rodriguez moved to address the council directly with the blunt honesty that had become characteristic of human diplomatic style. You have a choice. You can work with us as equals in a partnership based on mutual respect and shared responsibility. Or you can continue trying to manage us like dangerous children while depending on us to handle threats that your own forces cannot face. Ambassador Felnix from the Tau Ceti Union spoke for many of the smaller species when she addressed the fundamental question that everyone had been avoiding. What guarantee do we have that humanity will not use these capabilities against us once external threats are eliminated? The question hung in the chamber like a physical presence, while representatives from dozens of species waited for an answer that would determine the future of galactic civilization. President Lewis appeared to consider her response carefully. Before activating a display that showed Earth from orbit, with its blue ocean swirling clouds and the scars of countless natural disasters that had shaped human evolution. Ambassador, you ask for guarantees about species whose homeworld subjects them to extinction-level events on a regular basis, Lewis replied. We survive by working together because individual survival is impossible on a planet that considers supervolcanic eruptions and asteroid impacts to be routine weather. We learned cooperation not from philosophy, but from necessity. Dr. Marcus Webb stepped forward to provide scientific context that helped explain humanity's unique position in galactic civilization. Every human alive today is descended from survivors of at least 6 major extinction events that would have sterilized most worlds in known space. We developed technology and social structures specifically to help each other survive impossible conditions. Conquest requires resources that we prefer to invest in mutual survival. The debate continued for hours as species that had never faced existential threats tried to understand beings whose entire evolutionary history was shaped by constant existential crisis. In the end, the decision was made not by philosophical arguments, but by practical necessity. The galaxy needed protectors capable of fighting ancient weapons in impossible conditions, and humanity was the only species qualified for the job. The final vote established new protocols that recognized human forces as permanent partners in galactic security while providing Earth with equal representation in all council decisions. The age of managed integration was over, replaced by a partnership between species that had learned cooperation through safety and beings who had learned it through constant danger. As the session ended, Carter stood before the massive viewing port that showed the stars beyond Zephyr Prime and reflected on how much had changed since that desperate transmission had reached Captain Morrison's exploration ship. The galaxy had called for monsters to save them from extinction, and humanity had answered that call. Now everyone had to build a civilization that could accommodate both the saved and their saviors. Admiral Rodriguez joined her at the viewing port, and together they watched human ships departing on patrol missions that would take them to regions of space where no other species could survive. In the distance, new construction platforms were building vessels designed for integrated crews who would face whatever ancient threats still lurked in the dark between the stars. "Do you think they will ever truly trust us?" Carter asked. Rodriguez smiled as he watched a mixed squadron of human and alien fighters practicing maneuvers that would have been impossible before the war taught them to work together. "Trust is earned through shared hardship and mutual dependence. They needed us to survive, and we needed them to have something worth protecting. That is a stronger foundation than most civilizations build their alliances on." The call that summoned, the Deathworlders had indeed changed everything, and the galaxy would never be the same. But perhaps that change was exactly what both humanity and their alien neighbors needed to face whatever challenges awaited them in the vast darkness of unexplored space.